Hello, and welcome to this episode of Ways to Change Your Workplace with myself, Preena Shah. And I'm very excited to introduce to you today my friend Lorissa Garcia, who is all the way from Melbourne. Lorissa, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Ah, my absolute pleasure, Lorissa. I have a bit of an introduction to you, so if I may.
Go ahead.
Okay, so the wonderful Lorissa is from Melbourne and she owns an organization called Assembly Culture, which I really want to talk to you about today. Lorissa specializes as a coach and facilitator in the space of leadership and culture. Lorissa partners with leaders and organizations and teams, provoking thought and action for small shifts, behavioral shifts that make a big difference. Lorissa is a certified specialist in the emotional culture deck and works with organizations to uncover emotions, values, stories, practices, habits, rituals that enable healthy emotional cultures. And as most of you know, my background, I studied a degree in sociology and social psychology, and all of this talks to cultures and subcultures and all sorts related to that. And today I want to talk to Lorissa about the concept of emotional cultures at work versus cognitive cultures. I really want to unpack that for our audience, Lorissa, because people don't know really what it is. And you are talking a lot about it in the work that you're doing in supporting forward-thinking organizations. So Lorissa, welcome.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Lorissa, so I want to begin with asking you a first big and open question. Your organization is called Assembly Culture. What's that about and why did you call it that? And then can you tell us a little bit about the kind of work you're doing at the moment, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So Assembly Culture was brought together, I guess. I do a lot around leadership and a lot around culture. And I wanted to bring that culture off to the side to spotlight culture in itself. Now, the reason for the Assembly Culture name,
Yeah.
the definition of assembly is to gather for a common purpose. And I thought that just encapsulates culture so well. And I just thought, when we assemble, we get things done and we have, these different mindsets and beliefs and people and personalities and characters coming together. And that's what culture is really about. So assembly culture kind of fit the bill. In terms of the type of work that I do, so I do anything from a single workshop where we'd be exploring culture for an organization or a team, which is a subculture, right through to culture journeys where we'd be going through and unpacking, looking at the cognitive culture and the emotional culture, which we'll talk about shortly, and unpacking, what's the current culture, what's the current landscape, what's the desired culture, where do people want to be, and how do we fill that gap? So it could range from a single workshop to a couple of workshops to some one-on-one coaching circles. So depending on what sort of journey and how long that journey needs to be, it would be bespoke designed for each individual organisation that I work with. All focused around bringing more emotion, more F words, feelings to the workplace.
I love it. F words, yes. And I love the fact that you said it's bespoke because every single culture and every single microcosm of a subculture even is so different with every organization.
Absolutely. So subcultures used to be a bit of a dirty word. I think, in my time, subculture was something that that maybe hindered the performance of the organization because it was, siloed or broken off into separate pillars. But actually, subculture has a lot of power. So within small teams and functional teams, there is subcultures within there that make that team or that function work really well. And so we should be honoring that and pulling that out and having people articulate what that is. So that we're able to, allow people to belong in those organizations within the team that they're in or within the function that they're in.
Beautiful. And it completely makes sense in every kind of societal aspects of sociology hat on again. Subcultures are a normal part of any society, whether it be from a religious perspective, we'll have a subculture within there. Families have subcultures. Come on, people, we can all relate to this, yeah? And of course, this relates to the workplace as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brilliant and fascinating. I love, assembly culture. So assembly is to gather for a purpose. In the Indian language, there's a word which is a beautiful word, Lorissa, and I always try to bring it into the workplace, but I haven't found a way to officially bring it into the workplace yet. There's a word called satsang, and that is to be in good company, and it's gathering to be in good company. So hello, we are talking the same language.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Okay, Larissa, I really want to get into this. So before we delve into emotional culture, cognitive culture, for our audience who are potentially new to all things culture and culture optimization, can you high level describe what an organizational culture is, please?
Yeah, sure. So often when we talk about organizational culture, we kind of have this shorthand that talks about it's the way that we do things around here. So it's often anchored in values. So we have a set of values that anchor the culture.
Mhm.
And it's about the practices, the behaviors, the beliefs that each individual brings to the organization, the mindsets, whether that be individual or collective, the systems and the infrastructure within that organization. So cognitive culture has been studied for years, and it takes into account the collective kind of things that are coming together as a collective, often very prescribed.
Yes.
It's about the organisation telling us how we should be in the workplace. Very observable through things like dress, any practices,
Yeah.
structures, behaviours, verbal cues. Those are the sorts of things that sort of give us an indication into the cognitive culture. Whereas so values and behaviors, for instance, would be a piece of a cognitive culture because it's telling us
Yes.
how to be. Whereas when we look at emotional culture, it takes into account how people feel. It looks at the influences and the influencers, so the things and the people around, how are those things influencing how we show up in the workplace, how we go about our day, what are our habits, what are our rituals, what are the actions and behaviors that are outwardly being shown. So in an emotional culture where there's joy and fun and playfulness, you'll see a lot of laughter and a lot of joking around the office and activities which encourage that sort of play. Whereas in a culture where there's perhaps fear or an aggressive nature, you will see behaviour that reflects that. Lots of closed doors in offices, maybe some shouting or some behaviour that's aggressive, even in micro actions, even in facial expressions, those sorts of things.
Okay, so I'm going to step back a bit. Organizational culture is the DNA of how we be, do, belong here
Yeah,
at,
yeah.
at that basic
Beautiful
level.
summary.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
And then I've been looking at your work, Larissa. So, Larissa, for anyone who is listening in, I'm going to put Larissa's details in the show notes, and you have to read what she writes about. I geek out on it. So, this is Larissa's work. So Larissa talks about a cognitive culture. So absolutely role modeling the values. So there'll be, a code of conduct that we all have to sign when we start a new job, yes, we will comply. So that's that cognitive kind of culture.
Mm.
And that cognitive culture, therefore, then tells us how to behave appropriately according to the code of conduct. It tells us how to make decisions according to the organization's way.
Mhm.
It shows us how to demonstrate leadership according to their cognitive culture. Um, and basically, it's telling us to play nicely, which is, your words I remember reading. And I love that. But it's telling. It's
Mm.
very, like you said, it's very directive, it's very prescriptive. I say, you do, kind of like a command control
Yep.
culture, let's say.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. And that's what we're very much all used to, that kind of culture. That's the norm at the moment.
It is. It is. It's what we've been brought up with. It's
Yeah.
as we've gone through our work lives, the cognitive culture has been the thing that's been, telling us what to do, when to do it, how to do it, you know, why to do it.
Yeah.
And so when you start thinking about emotions, we think about the emotion that we're feeling in the workplace
Yes.
causes us to behave in certain ways. So emotion drives behavior.
Yes.
And so when I talked about values being that anchor for culture earlier,
Yeah.
we look at values being, if we were looking at a hierarchy, values at the top, a set of behaviors goes behind those values as a framework to say, this is what we will do, this is what we won't do, this is what we'll tolerate, this is what we won't accept. And so when we start to dig down into emotional culture, we go one level deeper than that.
Yes.
And we look at what are the emotions that the organization is enabling for our people,
Yes.
and what are the behaviors that are coming as a result of those emotions. And so you start to pick up themes of the actual behaviors and the actual values of an organization, as opposed to something that's written on the wall or in a corporate document.
This is a massive missing piece, Larissa. And can I ask you, from your own personal opinion, or all of the research? I know Larissa does a lot of research. All of the research that you've done, How on earth has this come about? The whole concept of an emotional culture. What's your
Yeah.
thinking?
Yeah, so interestingly, you said, most people haven't heard of cognitive culture until I started looking at it into emotional culture about 4 years ago now. I had never heard of the differences of cognitive versus emotional culture. And there's some really interesting work from two academics, Sigal Barsaid and Olivia O'Neill, and they sort of have championed this work around emotional culture. But I guess the turning point for me was tripping over a tool from a company called Writers and Elephants called the Emotional Culture Deck. And I saw it, and straight away it got my attention. Emotional culture deck. Like I'm a big fan of any tool anyway, cards and tools in the workplace. I love because it provides this, a vehicle to have a conversation in another way.
Yeah.
But as I started to go down the path of emotional culture, I realized that it's not just a card game. It is massive out there in the academic world around emotions and how they drive behavior, in society, but in organizations specifically.
Yes, but we haven't applied it to the workplace properly still, I don't feel. And that's why you're doing all of this wonderful work. So, emotional culture within the workplace, I'm just thinking a practical application for our audience, Larissa. Then, okay, we've got high level values. That might be trust, respect, care, whatever else.
Yep.
High level statements, they mean nothing to you and I unless we've got the descriptors of, tell me more, the behaviors, the emotions. How do you work with an organization? So you've got high level values, which are just out, pie in this sky out there.
Yeah.
How do we make them more meaningful with the work that you've done? I know you've done lots of values work as well, haven't you?
Yeah, so I guess there's two ways that I would work with a client. One, if they've already got their values and they're set in stone, then we would work from a values perspective and look at what their values are. Do they fit the current landscape? I think when we, as you said, they're words, but they also can be very subjective.
Yes.
People put a different meaning to them. And so your behavioral framework provides the clarity for people. What I often do, though, is work with organisations who have maybe got a set of values or are not sure if their values are right and work from bottom up. So we will go through the emotions in the organisation to map the current emotions, what's happening in the organisation at the moment. What are people feeling? Why are they feeling that? Are they feeling disempowered, disillusioned? Are they feeling as though they're not able to have courage to speak up? And so we'd be looking at the things that were enabling that type of behaviour from an unpleasant perspective, if you like, and then look at the things that are enabling pleasant behaviours and pleasant emotions to be felt. So if people are feeling empowered and positive and brave and courageous, then that's going to be reflective. And so with the emotions piece, we'll start there. I also do some other activities. One of my favourites, which I'm going to give away here because I really love it, is to ask the organisation, if you met this organisation at a party, who would they be? And you start to get a really good indicator of the words and the types of things that are coming up around care or inclusion or safety or risk, taking risks or innovation, whatever that might be. And so you start to basically get a bit of a picture of what people are saying, not just leadership. So I would always start with the organisation's people co-creating. What does it look like to work here? What does it feel like to work here? And so getting a really good picture to really stress test those values if they've already got a set of values. If they haven't got the values, great. That's a great blank canvas to start from. And you would do that similar type process going through with that, a similar type activity of at a party. If you were to meet the organisation at a party, who would they be? And doing really deep around the emotions of what people feel, why they're feeling it, what's hindering, what's helping, what could we be doing that's different, and getting that desired culture and starting to move towards setting up practices and rituals that will move towards more of that desired culture, as opposed to getting stuck in the way we've already done things before, which is not providing that healthy emotional culture.
Yep. And okay, Larissa, another missing piece is, I don't feel, this is my personal opinion, from my experience so far, I don't feel that organizations have placed enough value on that desired culture aspect. Like, where are we heading? What's our vision? So yes, an organization will have a vision statement, mission statement, strategic plan, whatever. your strategic plan means nothing unless you've got the desired culture to suit that whatever achievements you want to make, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, yeah, so if you've got the desired culture, you're constantly thinking about the micro moments that you talked about, the rituals, the elements that you want to create to get you to that place, because
Yeah.
it's not going to happen overnight as well, I imagine, is it?
It's not. And I guess organizations these days, I think we're becoming better at communicating that strategy piece,
Yeah,
that bigger picture piece.
yeah.
And I think, you know, as leaders start to work with their subcultures around creating that, you know, healthy culture within the sub teams, I think it's important to link back to the bigger picture. Otherwise, it's just a destination that, you know, is
Yes.
doing the, you know, doing the work of
Out
a
there.
silo.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have to have a destination in the GPS. Otherwise, you'll just go on a nice meandering scenic path and not actually make it to your destination at all.
Love that analogy. So I've read Larissa's work on what an emotional culture is, and Larissa, I'm going to paraphrase your words here. So an emotional culture is in the micro moments, it's in facial expressions, it's in the body language, it's
Mhm.
even in the decor of your surroundings, it's the environment that you're in, and like you said, it's the rituals and routines. Now, when we're talking about facial expressions and body language, that's a human aspect. And I own my behavior, I own my emotions. However, sometimes I don't because things can go astray and life takes over, right? And then there's an aspect of emotional contagion which happens at work that people don't talk about. So, can you firstly describe what emotional contagion is, and then can we discuss what that is in the workplace, please, Larissa?
Yeah, sure. So emotional contagion is almost like, you know, similar to the pandemic. We catch emotion from other people. We catch a vibe, we catch the mood, the feeling that's going around. And there was a study done out of the University of Sydney that it's featured in a book called the Culture Code, actually, and it's one of my favourites from a culture perspective. One of my favourite books. And this study from the University of Sydney planted one person to play a different role in I think it was an IT company who was starting a new project, and played the role of making that person behave as a slacker, a jerk, and a downer in different settings, and testing how long it took for that emotion to catch on. And it was as little as 7 minutes that emotional contagion took over the rest of the group. And so, you know, the downer who was negative and low energy and slumping all over the desk, within 7 minutes, people were starting to mirror that behavior and catch that emotion. And so emotional contagion from a workplace perspective can be so powerful. You know, it's driven by an individual or a group of individuals who are feeding off of each other.
Yeah.
And, you know, it can actually bring down the whole team, a whole meeting within 7 minutes, as little as 7 minutes, which is fascinating stuff.
Isn't it just? And again, I liken this emotional contagion to, let's say, a family, when I was young, if mom's having a bad day,
Yes,
you feel it, and you take it on as well. Uh,
absolutely.
and then again, like if it's your manager having a crappy day, I will give you a practical example. So when I worked in my corporate days, I used to work with a manager who had up and down moods, and my team would, before I even came into work, they'd text me good
Mm,
mood or bad mood beforehand. And
mhm.
they'd say to me, okay, you can say good morning today. Don't say anything this morning.
Yeah,
So people are on edge. You
absolutely.
sense it, you feel it. Even if I haven't verbalized how I'm feeling, we are such connected, beautiful creatures that we can sense how another person's feeling emotionally, and we take it on.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, so it reminds me of a quote from Dr. Mark Brackett. He wrote a book called Permission to Feel. It talks about emotions in children, but I took so much away from that as, from a leadership perspective, from a team member, from a parent's perspective. And it talks about the fact that you are constantly sending signals in terms of the mood or the emotions that you're feeling. And your signals are approach or avoid. So your signals are sending out the vibe of approach or avoid. And so if you're a leader or a manager or even a contributor in an organization who's constantly sending that avoid signal through, whatever body language that is, facial expression, tone of voice, the way that you walk around the office, that's going to be detrimental to the culture eventually. That is, people are going to catch on to that pretty quickly, and you will be the person that will, be the person to avoid. It will be, something that, really impacts your personal brand, impacts the team around you, impacts, the culture of the team and the organisation.
100%. I'm going to be crude and say shit sticks. And that's really true, Lorissa, because the professional brand of a leader, oh my gosh, people are going to remember how you make them feel. There's a Maya Angelou quote, something along the lines of people are going to remember how you make them feel.
Yes. Yeah. They won't remember what you do, but they'll remember how you feel. Yes, absolutely.
Which leads me nicely to a revolutionary thing that you did when you launched your business. I'm not going to steal your thunder. Can you tell me about the posters?
Yes. So cognitive and emotional culture was something that I've been studying for some time. And one of the things that I recognized was that contagion can have the biggest impact on how we set up an emotional culture to be, successful or how it might be undone. And so this contagion happens in workplaces, and we're often not even aware of it. And so, even you said before, you can have a boss who is, coming into work, slamming doors, grunting at people, and, and that signal of avoid. I think that can catch on quite quickly. And so I design posters that sort of, call out behavior to say, hey, are you the person? Are you this person? Are you this person that's spreading, some bad vibes around the office? Here's a 5-minute mindfulness exercise to take a step back and have a debrief. And we don't want to avoid feeling unpleasant emotion. We don't want to tell people not to feel unpleasant emotion. I think that's really important when it comes to emotional culture. Yeah. We're not suppressing that. We don't want to push people into this toxic positivity all the time. Yeah. But what we want to do is for people to take the pause and understand what the impact of that is on other people. And so went out with the posters. It kind of went a little bit viral, which I didn't intend it to do. Which was good. It got a lot of attention, which is amazing. And so that, that kind of contagion has become something that assembly culture is known for.
It's beautiful. And I've seen photos of organizations putting it on their meeting doors, check in on your emotions before you walk in this meeting. Yes, Lorissa, you are creating a revolution.
I hope so.
It might be a simple thing to consider beforehand, but my gosh, the effect of this, of us checking in on our emotions before we actually go and lead a team meeting or whatever kind of meeting, it's huge. It's massive.
Absolutely. And it's not just in a corporate environment. Hospitals, aged care units, yoga studios, your hairdresser, as you're walking into those people, I always sort of ask, what's the weather you're bringing today? What's the atmosphere around you that you're bringing and potentially impacting others with?
Yeah. And thank you so much. You made a really good point about toxic positivity as well. So we don't want to ignore our emotions. We don't want to, because emotions are data, they tell us that something's up. Well, we need to listen to ourselves as well. Yes, very good point. And I spoke to Dr. Mikey Niehaus about, toxic positivity on another podcast. So not to denote any emotions, don't ignore your emotions, but check in on yourself. And it's, it's self-reflection, which is a huge aspect for all of us. We often, in a workplace as well, Lorissa, we go from meeting to meeting to meeting on autopilot. We often don't get that chance to check in on ourselves.
Yes. Yeah. It's just taking the pause in between those meetings, because you're picking up the energy of other people around you. So, what are you bringing, but also what are you picking up and taking alongside you, and then taking home at the end of the day to debrief over the dinner table. Yeah. That's the, I guess the indicator into healthy emotional cultures is, what's the dinner table conversation you're having? What's the conversation you're having about work with your friends? What's the barbecue chat that you're having around your workplace? Yeah. Because that will give you insight into, whether you've got a healthy emotional culture.
Completely. And, the really important aspect of this for organizations to really focus on their emotional culture is to enhance the psychological safety of everybody in the workplace, and, psychosocial hazards and all of this new lingo that's the latest, especially in Australia at the moment. Lorissa, can you talk to psychological safety or psychosocial hazards in relation to this emotional culture topic?
Yeah. So look, I think, I get asked, I reckon at least once a week, I get asked from people within, my sort of circles or connections around using emotions in workplaces. Is it safe to do it in teams that are, not psychologically safe? And so I think there's a real role for facilitators to play in that, and HR people and the people that are going in to do this work around emotions. I think that there needs to be a safe space for people to talk about their emotions. And as facilitators, we need to be able to set that up. I think there needs to be a place where you can recognize that debriefing with a group of 20 people probably is not going to be a safe environment for anyone, never alone in a group that's not psychologically safe. And so, doing some little breakouts to do one-on-one debriefing and talk about that one-on-one, or start to just introduce the emotion as a language, as opposed to, what do you want to feel today? What have you felt in the last month? What do you want to feel in the next week? I think it's, starting to introduce emotions as a safe language to use. And so, bringing in some emotional conversations of, using some check-in activities in a meeting. How are you feeling? Or how do you want to feel at the end of this meeting? And start to get emotional literacy. I think often when it comes to emotions and talking about emotions in workplaces, we don't have the literacy to talk about it. We don't have that language. And so when you've got a tool that you can use to almost externally validate that from yourself, you've got a tool that is normalizing some of these emotions that people feel, it becomes easier for people to pick up a card or, out of this tool and say, I'm feeling disempowered today, and this is why. Or I'm feeling disempowered, and that's all I want to say. And that's okay. We can honor that people don't want to share. We need to honor that, people, some people have experienced trauma. Emotions can trigger that trauma to come up again. And so we would encourage people to play. We say lean into the play. I call talking about emotions a full contact sport. We encourage you to lean in, but lean into your edge. Don't go beyond that window of your edge. Talk where you're comfortable. We won't ask everyone to share. So I never go around the room and say, okay, you go next, and then you go next, and then you go next. I invite people to share, and then it starts a conversation and starts to build the trust in the team that there's some people that are being vulnerable. It works a treat when the leader goes first. When the leader goes first and shows some vulnerability, it suddenly opens up the rest of the team to go, this is a safe environment for me to be vulnerable to. And so it's that opportunity for people to really, talk about what they're feeling, why they're feeling it, what they want to feel. I've found that probably it builds psychological safety as opposed to undoes that psychological safety.
Yeah. And thank you so much for making the point about the emotional literacy, and that we're all on a different, spectrum of emotional literacy as well. And that's completely fine and completely normal. Lorissa has lots of resources on her website. And then another wonderful resource, I don't know if you have it on your website, if I saw it there or somewhere else, there's a whole list of emotions that you can even download by Googling.
Yeah.
Just having that on your desk even is so handy to check in on yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's a couple of resources that I would recommend. The Feeling Wheel by the Gottman Institute I've got it on my desk actually. It's just over here, and it's a wheel that looks at, the different aspects and then gets down to more granularity around emotion. So it's not just happy, sad, mad, angry, it goes into a lot more detail. So that's a really good resource to have. And I've got it right there that I look at, pretty much every day. The Emotional Culture Deck is the other tool that I use, and you can go online and get a free download. So there's, you can download that as a free resource, print it out, and you've got a deck of your own cards basically to play with and have some, insights into emotional literacy there.
Beautiful. Because Lorissa, I feel, I don't know, I know this isn't only just organizational culture change, we're changing individuals as well within a workplace. So it truly is revolutionary when workplaces take this on and do it in a psychologically safe way.
Yeah.
That's the big element. Yeah.
I think when it comes to that individual work, it's so important. I think when we talk about transformation and change and things happening in organizations don't transform, individuals do. And that's a quote from a book called Mastering Leadership. And they talk about the fact that it's individual mindsets that change. You have to work with the individuals within an organization to see a change process going at it, and you'd know this from your change experience and expertise. It's that individual work is so powerful, and it's also really, valued and appreciated. I did a session last week with a group, and we worked on the emotional culture deck individually. I will always work from an individual perspective first. We always do that individual activity of what you want to feel in the workplace and what you don't want to feel, but might from time to time. And as we were debriefing that process, someone said, I've never been in an organisation that's come to us with an individual activity. It's always been about the organisation and the strategy and the planning and the goals and, the direction. But this individual work's so important. And I absolutely agree, wholeheartedly agree with her.
Amazing. I delivered an executive coaching session yesterday, and it's, linked to transformation and change. And I pitched lots of stuff. But one of the things I said that in our executive coaching, we're going to be working on 3 elements: me, we, and that's us as an executive team, and then us, the whole organizational perspective. And I loved it yesterday, Lorissa. So when people were responding and, we were having a wonderful conversation, they were saying, this is from a me perspective. This is from a we perspective. This is from an us perspective. So I thought, yes, we're starting something different now. And it's simple as that. Just a shift in your language shifts your thinking then as a result. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's development, right? That's where you get the gold.
Yeah.
That's where the transformation comes from.
100%. Now, if we still have naysayers, Lorissa, if people are still saying, what on earth is this emotional culture stuff about? I don't still believe it. What are the pros of an emotional culture? And are there any cons?
Yeah. Look, so the pros, let's start with the pros. So I think, things like from an individual level, employee satisfaction and engagement goes up, your trust and psychological safety. So that trust around actually people care for me, my manager cares for me. They've given us the time to do this. So trust and psychological safety. It also can sort of start to impact things like financial drivers, financial measures, things like absenteeism. When we start to think about mental health, mental and physical health, you start to look at the links between emotional expression. So, being able to just name and talk about an unpleasant emotion can immediately take away the power from that. And so from an individual perspective, that can really lead to some great outcomes. When it comes to things like burnout, there's also some studies from Sakal Basaid and Olivia O'Neill that talk about the measures around burnout and preventing burnout, because people are able to talk about, catch their emotions, name it to tame it, they talk about, so that's a Dan Siegel sort of philosophy around naming to tame. So things like creativity and innovation, those are the sorts of things that organisations can see an uplift in when they start to introduce emotional cultures which allow people to be more emotional, to talk about emotions, to experience some of those tough or tricky emotions, and be given space to do that, and be given space to have a conversation around that. So I'm just working on a little bit of research now around how emotions can impact decision making. So that's another area. And there was a study done in Permission to Feel around teachers marking students' assessments. And so they set them up in sort of groups and gave them videos to watch which were unpleasant or made them angry or upset, or, give them kind of feelings of what we might class as undesirable feelings. Yeah. And then a group of teachers went through a different process of feelings that were, much more desirable. And the outcomes around their marking were so fascinating. So it does actually, so the decision-making process is massively impacted by our emotions and how we're feeling.
Sold. Any cons?
Yeah, look, so I did run through a few of them before around, you need to provide the space for people, the safe space for people to talk about their emotions, understand that, trauma may come up. And so being able to offer some support around that, wrap that support, around any trauma or anything that comes up that triggers people. What we don't want to do is force people to feel a certain way. So, as an organisation, we want to feel inspired. And so everyone around us must feel inspired. We don't tell people how to feel. We just provide the environment, the atmosphere for people to feel more pleasant emotions. And so, we want to make sure that that's dealt with. We also want to be able to, find ways for people to, deal with the tricky emotions that they're coming up with. So, be able to say, hey, I'm feeling just a bit down today, or I'm feeling a bit off today. And, for the people around them to know what they need to be able to deal with and, work through their tricky emotions.
This just makes us connect better as humans as well, Lorissa.
Absolutely. A lot of the work that I'm getting called in to do at the moment. And I think it's, just on the back of lockdowns and COVID and lots of organisations going through a lot of change. So I'm being called in to do connections work. We want to reconnect. We need to bring our people back together. We want to have conversations that are on a deeper level. And so these conversations around emotions fit beautifully into that.
Amazing. I love the fact that you said, and a really important fact for organizations to remember, you cannot force emotions upon people. Lorissa, I worked at an organization once which had a value of upbeat.
Was it a startup?
No.
Oh.
No.
Sounds like a startup.
It went down like a lead balloon.
Yeah.
People did not accept it, and people said, do not tell me how to feel. Yeah. So people, like organizations need to be very careful about their values as well, and the values not being so prescriptive from an emotional perspective. So there's a fine balance, which is why they work with people like yourselves and me, because it's still nuanced, because every organization, and I love the fact at the beginning you said you tailor your work to suit every organization, because there's different levels of maturity, there's different stuff happening beneath the iceberg that you first need to uncover and tailor it to suit that level of emotional maturity from an organizational and an individual perspective.
Yeah. Look, I think, the upbeats one's an interesting one. I think if you want your people to feel upbeat, then what are the practices and the habits and the rituals that you're building to help people feel upbeat as an outcome? I wouldn't be using it as a directive. I'd be using it as that's an outcome that we want people to feel.
Yeah.
And building the rituals and the practices around that.
Completely. Lorissa, I could talk to you forever, but I have one final question.
Sure.
My final question is, Lorissa, if I was to hand you a magic wand, what is one way you would change the way of the workplace?
I have thought about this question, and it's a pretty simplified answer, I think, Prina, and it's about making these types of conversations more mainstream. The psychological safety conversation and philosophy is becoming normalized now. I'd love to see organizations using, some of this emotional literacy work, being able to have conversations about emotions and what the organization is enabling for people on a more regular basis, using emotions to set up change, using emotions to set up, a project team, being able to debrief or do a retrospective around, what did we feel and what were the milestones here? And, those are the sorts of conversations I'd love to see go more mainstream.
Beautiful. Lorissa, I'm going to finish with one more line. I can talk to you forever, Lorissa.
Me too.
So from an organizational perspective, we know, I know that one of the hardest things that happens for leaders especially is the difficult conversation aspect. Now, you've just talked about, I wish that there were more emotional and psychological conversations within the workplace. If that happened, you wouldn't have to have as many difficult conversations. So, Lorissa, drop the mic there. Beautiful. Wonderful. Thank you so much for today. It has been a brilliant chat, as always, Lorissa.
Thank you. It's been really great chatting that through with you.